Hi, it's Allison from the Law School Toolbox. Are you nervous about interviews? We've got Big Law recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about how you can be yourself and still get the job. Welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, my pleasure. Let's jump right in here. We often see students struggling with feeling like they need to be somebody else. What they see is kind of the perfect candidate in legal job interviews. Why do you think this happens?
I think this is just human nature. You want to get the job, so you want to be the person you think they want you to be. I think the problem with that is that you don't really know who they want you to be. So trying to bend over backwards to be this student that you picture they want to hire is just generally not going to work out for you. But I think it's just completely normal to try to figure out what they want and check all the boxes.
Right. I mean, I think everybody thinks, oh, they have to be this or have to be that. And sometimes it's things that are under your control. And sometimes it's things that are totally out of your control. So I do think this can become a problem. It is funny, though. You really don't know what people are looking for. I remember when I was interviewing for clerkships, it turns out that the judge who actually hired me was really into architecture. And I had a master's in architecture. So that's something that you would think is totally irrelevant to this application, but is literally why he hired me. When I talked to his clerks, they were like, oh, as soon as we saw your application, we knew that he was going to make you an offer. We 100% knew. And I had no idea on that. I would never have thought that that would be relevant to anything.
I think this happens so much of the time. And sometimes they're looking for something that they can't even define, that they'll just get out of the conversation. And I would say, I think the majority of this is actually out of your control. So trying to control it and hold it so tight and again, check all these boxes, I just think it always backfires if that is your approach to it. Because I totally agree. You don't know what they're looking for. It's not every lawyer that you interview with is looking for the same thing in a candidate. So it's better to be more genuine, and then it will work out with the person that appreciates that, you know?
Yeah, I think people can sense if you're not being authentic. And if you're trying to mold yourself into this idea of, oh, I have to be so serious and so this and so that, when maybe this person is actually super chill and is looking for somebody else that can just be chill and get the work done, but have fun at the same time. What are some places you see this kind of playing out specifically?
I think that definitely people are sometimes trying to make up for something. So they've decided that they're not at a good enough school, or their grades aren't good enough, or they're not on law review, and they picture that these are all the things that this person's looking for. So somehow they try to have their personality make up for that. They tried to go back and find all of these things that will show their skills as a student or what they picture being a lawyer means. I think is another thing that comes up a lot, and it can seem like a caricature of what they think a lawyer is, when in reality, it's a job. If you don't really know how to do it until you start doing it. So I think that kind of insecurity can be at the center of all of these things. And I just don't think that's a good approach. Generally, if you're at the interview stage, they've looked at your materials and they think you're worth talking to. So I would say move on from that stuff. They can see all that stuff on your resume. They know what your grades are. They know where you're at school. So let's try to talk about who you are.
Right. So we're going to dive into some of those specifics in a minute. But yeah, I think the caricature of a lawyer is also very true. People think, oh, I have to be super aggressive and this and that. And yeah, there are people out there who are like that, but lawyers span a wide variety. And there are also people who would be repelled by somebody coming in an interview and being like, I'm so aggressive, blah, blah, blah.
I find that lawyers are often non-confrontational and introverts, which doesn't fit with this idea of a courtroom lawyer. But I think that the majority of lawyers fit that personality type, actually.
It is true. I mean, most people, including myself, I knew who were litigators, were actually like, we don't really like conflict. It's just what we do. I don't want to have conflict with the people that are on my team, on my side.
I think in an interview that comes across as being the gunner and being the obnoxious person, if that's your approach, and that may not be you at all, but that is what you've decided that you think they're looking for. And so you're acting that way in an interview.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like if that is your personality and you are the gunner, then all right, go for it. And again, that person probably shouldn't try to tone themselves down that much and be agreeable. Like if you're not agreeable, well, you're not agreeable. Somebody's going to want that.
I agree, because remember, this is somewhere you're hopefully gonna work for a while. So you do wanna find the right fit. It's not just about a job, any job, most of the time.
Right. I mean, ideally, it should be something you can keep for at least a few years without going completely crazy. Finding a job every year is really hard and time consuming. So, yeah, I think it's about finding a fit here. And I totally get people, particularly if they're coming in without a whole lot of job experience, may have some imposter syndrome, super common, and may be overcompensating for certain things. And I think you're right, it is that insecurity. So, before people go into interviews, what do you think they should do if they know that this is something that they might be susceptible to?
Well, practice is my number one piece of advice, and that might mean practicing with another person. That might mean recording yourself, practicing to yourself and listening to it, and we've talked about this before, that can be very painful and difficult to do, but I have never talked to anyone who didn't get something out of doing that. It is important to see how it comes across. I would actually also talk to people, practice with people who aren't lawyers to see how it sounds. I would just get as much practice as I could and get feedback and be able to take that feedback and absorb it and not get defensive about it and try to make adjustments as needed. I think that this can also come across as you're practicing so much that it sounds like you've just memorized something. That is not what I'm saying you should do, because I think to me that's kind of the same concept of not being
Right.
yourself.
You want the perfect answer to every
Yeah.
question. There is no perfect answer. It's just going to sound scripted and you're going to get thrown off if somebody interrupts you and says, okay, great, but what about? And then you're like, oh, I don't have the perfect answer for that. Now I'm paralyzed.
And I think actually that's at the heart of all of this, is this idea of the perfect answer, the perfect student, the what you're looking for. And there really isn't. I actually think most of this is about how you answer the question. I think that there could be 10 different answers to the same question, and someone could want to hire every one of those people, depending on how they answered it. And your ability to roll with the punches and deal with a question you weren't prepared for, all of that matters, even if your answer wasn't spot on. The other thing is, I think people try to answer the exact question in the exact right way. And obviously, you want to be on point and not say something that's completely off base. But you can have an answer that didn't answer the exact question that can sound like it did. I say this all the time, and I think people get so tripped up. Oh, that story did not demonstrate that exact thing they asked. And I'll hear it and say, it was close enough. So,
Yeah, exactly. Like, tell me about a time when, and you're like, I'll tell you about a time that's sort of like that. Okay, that's good enough.
the other thing to remember, my experience is people want you to do well. I think that sometimes students think that this is some kind of test and they're trying to trip you up and they're trying to see if they can shake you. I feel like most people do not want an interview to go poorly, and they want you to do
No.
well and they don't want it to be uncomfortable. For some reason, students think this is supposed to be hard or supposed to be bad.
No, I mean, occasionally you'll run into that person who's just like a total pill and wants to like make everybody struggle. But most people, I mean, anytime I did an interview, I was just like, oh, okay, great. This is 30 minutes out of my day that I get to probably bill. And all I have to do is like talk to this person and get to know them and be friendly and answer their questions. This is easy for me. Don't make it hard.
And I bet if you feel like the student's uncomfortable, you wanna fix that. You don't want them to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm an empathetic person. I'm trying to make you feel at home. I'm not sure everyone interviews this way, but probably they do because we're not trained usually to interview. So you're giving people softball questions, you know?
Yes.
What do you like about law school? What's your favorite class? I'm not trying to like trip people up. I'm just trying to make a conversation. Oh, I see on here that you're interested in bowling. Tell me more about that, you know?
Well, that's the other thing. I think students think it all has to have to do with law school and have to be academic and all of this. And the reality is sometimes you're just gonna have a conversation. You're gonna bond over architecture or baseball or something else. So I think that's completely fine. Sometimes students will try to keep getting back on topic or something. And
Right.
that isn't what this needs to be. This isn't a test, you know?
Right. Literally, the last thing I usually wanted to talk about was law or law school. I mean, I was doing that 10 to 12 hours a day. I was happy to talk to them about their other interests. But yeah, occasionally you get that person who's like, oh, well, let me tell you about my law review note. I was like, I was actually having a really interesting conversation about what you were baking last week. But okay, cool. We can talk about your law review note if you really want to bore me with that.
That's the thing. I feel like that's a turnoff. It's like, oh, okay, I understand what this student's trying to do.
Yeah. It's also just not recognizing the flow of the conversation. Like the person who's interviewing you, if they're interested in a certain thing, you should talk about that thing. That's just good interviewing.
Exactly. Really, you want to make a connection as a human being to this other human being because that is going to, in the end, make them say, oh, I would want to work with this person.
Right. This person was pleasant. I enjoyed the conversation. Done. That's all we're looking for.
Because there's probably 20 other law students that have very similar background to you, right? But, oh, I like this person. I enjoyed
Right.
the conversation. That's it. It's not that complicated.
It's literally like they were pleasant.
Okay. This is true.
They didn't say or do anything that made me be like, I don't think I want to work with them 12 hours a day or more.
Exactly. And I feel like the interviewer can really tell if you had decided, this is my persona, these are all the points I want to make, and try to keep getting them back in, even if it doesn't go with the flow of the conversation. And I just find that so awkward, even though I think some students think, oh, but I needed to say all this in the interview. No, you didn't. You needed to just make a good impression.
Right. You need to talk about whatever they were asking you about and not push your agenda on the person who's actually in charge.
Exactly. The other thing that I think can be an issue in this whole area is when students try to figure out the background of the interviewer and fit everything into what that person practices,
Right.
especially if it's something you're not interested in. So the way interviews work is, of course, the person who made your schedule wanted to give you people that fit with whatever you said your interests are. And sometimes they will, and sometimes they won't be as successful in that. And sometimes they just need to fill an interview schedule. And so it could be people who are practicing areas of law that you are not interested in at all. That's fine. They work there, they're lawyers. That's all that needs to be on the schedule. And they don't expect that just because they are a tax lawyer, that you want to be a tax lawyer because you're in an interview with them. So you don't need to make that case. You don't need to even discuss it at all. They're fine with just talking.
Yeah, you don't need to pretend like, oh, I haven't taken a tax class, but I'm definitely going to. I'm really interested. It's like, no, you're not. You're a 3L. Like, come on.
Right. And I get why people do this because they think, oh, they'll like me more if I like what they like, but that's just not how it is. So,
And oftentimes, you know better than I do on this, but my understanding with interviews is they're also trying to get a variety of people. So you want to give somebody a younger person, a kind of mid person, maybe a partner. You want to have that range. And people are busy. You may not be able to get your exact desired practice area in all of those, but they're trying to mix it up so that you get more of a sense of the firm as well.
exactly. And I think you can ask questions about
Right.
their practice area without having any interest in doing it because a firm is going to have interaction with practice areas that have nothing to do with what you do. So I think it's important to be curious, but
Right.
just don't pretend with every single person because then also it's going to look weird on the review. When you said you wanted to do 6 different things, they will figure that out because it's all going to be printed together. So,
Right. No, and I think the tax one is great because that's pretty specific. So that's a great example where if I'm in an interview with a tax attorney and I knew nothing about tax, I might say something like, oh, that's really interesting. What does an average day as a tax attorney look like for you? Is that different from a litigator? And they'll be like, yes, here's what I do.
totally. Just be interested.
Exactly. I probably wouldn't be like, I know nothing about tax. Tell me everything. I think there's a line, but yeah, obviously they're an attorney. You can assume they do something legal related. But I would actually find that a pretty interesting conversation. Like, how is it your day different than somebody else who works here, given that you do this more specific area?
And I bet that they don't have that many people asking about
Right.
tax. It sounds boring to a lot of people. So I feel like they would appreciate that.
Yeah, apparently it's actually a highly stressful area of practice, as I found out from friends who did that. All right, let's talk about a few specific areas where this might play out. And you've alluded to some of these, but let's dive in a little. What if you're at a lower ranked school, but you've done really well there? Do you need to really sell yourself a lot to make up for the school?
No.
Next question.
Basically, I think it comes down to what I said about these insecurities, and I totally get it. But the fact is, that stuff is on your resume. They have seen it. They hopefully have looked. But I feel like that's all on there. They ask you a question where that's a relevant answer, like, how did you pick this school? It might be relevant to say they gave me a full ride.
Totally
So
legit.
yeah, and I think they appreciate that. They understand that that's how people make decisions because I think that happens a lot for people who do really well at a lower
Right.
ranked school. There's usually a reason. So I just think that you don't want it to be a really big deal. And you also don't want it to sound like you're bad mouthing your school.
Yeah, I think you want to have something positive to say. And it might be that, I did really well my first year, as you can see from my transcript. And I considered my options and thought maybe I would transfer. But then I realized I really enjoyed the school and I had all these benefits, XYZ, and I have a lot of people supporting me. And I thought it was going to be a really great experience. So here I am.
Exactly.
And like,
And the
you're
fact is they're interviewing you. So
right. I
you've
was gonna
gotten
say,
that far.
yeah, you're interviewing for the same job as somebody at a different school. So I think by the time you get to the interview, these things should not be a huge issue. You are sitting in the same chair as somebody who went to Harvard, basically.
Also, I will say, like, different interviewers will feel really differently about this or
Yeah.
different people. There are people who really like the top students at a lower ranked school. There are people who feel like the school is the most important. So even if you're midway through the class, it's okay if it's a higher ranked school. So I think it just depends who you're talking to. And there's no way you can know that going in. So your approach needs to be the same, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And there's good data on this that people who do well at lower ranked schools actually tend to succeed more in law firms than people from top schools. But again, you don't have to point that out.
It's just there. These are the stuff that's out of your control. Yeah,
And although people know this, everybody's read the same study.
exactly.
So yeah, you don't have to sell yourself. You're already there. You belong there. Just go with it. All right. What if you are at a great school, but you have a few low grades? Maybe 1L didn't go so well. Do you need to explain these?
This if you are asked. So do not bring it up. I don't know why everyone wants to bring it up. This is so common. Now, you should prepare an
Right.
answer, but you do not give that answer unless you are directly asked, and the answer should be short.
Yeah, the answer should be, yeah, first semester was definitely challenging, but I learned a lot. I turned it around and here we are.
Yeah, have some kind of story. Hopefully, there was an upward trajectory, something I use a lot. Maybe there wasn't, but you come up with some kind of way that you are selling this as a positive and do not go into details about what happened to cause that grade. Do not badmouth the professor. Do not go into details about a surgery. There are like a million personal issues that should not be discussed in an interview. You just need to keep it simple and vague.
Yeah, even if it's something like, oh, yeah, I had some really unfortunate personal stuff come up right
Yes.
before that test, and it is what it is, but I don't think it's something that's going to recur.
I also think that it's actually pretty rare for someone to directly ask. I know it happens, but I think more often than not, they see it. They don't feel like having a conversation about it is going to add much to it. Unless it's a really big outlier, which happens occasionally. But I would just say prepare for it. But most likely you're not even going to be asked. So just go in with the same plan you would go into if you didn't have that grade.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of the time I even had a transcript in front of me. I had a resume, but I mean, maybe I had a transcript. I don't recall ever looking at them, to be honest.
Well, a lot of interviewers don't like to have the transcript first before they talk to the person, then they'll look after. And they might feel like, oh, no, I really like this person. There's no way I could call them back.
Right.
Or they might say, it's on the bubble. I really like this person. I'm going to make a case for them. But I think that generally interviewers want to get to know you as a person and not as a grade.
Right. Because again, if you're sitting in the callback interview, you've passed some sort of test of, okay, your grade is sufficient. Maybe it's not amazing. Maybe you're not top of the group that we're looking at, but it is sufficient to be hired here because otherwise they're probably not going to go through an entire callback round because that takes time. It's expensive.
I think the only time grades come up again in a callback is if you did very borderline or they're comparing you to somebody else where you were totally equal and they can say they had a much higher GPA. Now, again, this is completely out of your control. There's nothing
Right.
you could have done different. I feel like you treat the interview the same. And if your grades are going to end up being the issue, there is nothing you could have done to change them at that point.
And honestly, most people like we said, don't care. You might encounter somebody who wants to be a jerk about it, but they're going to be a jerk about something. They're going to find something else to be a jerk about, basically.
I agree.
All right. What if you're not a typical hire for this organization? You're not somebody that meets a specific mold, whatever that is, or whatever you think that is. And some of these may be kind of immutable characteristic type things that you can't change. How should people handle that?
So I actually think it's what you said, what you think it is, because very rarely are you going to know exactly what they're looking for, even if you know who they've hired in the past, right?
Right.
So my approach is still to be as true to yourself as you can in the interview, because they probably brought you back because they were interested in you. I personally have seen more people move along because they had a more interesting background, or this was a second career, or they put themselves through college, so it took a lot longer. All sorts of things that put you not typical. You didn't have top undergrad, poli-sci major, who went straight to law school, got the best grades. That's boring in a lot of ways and doesn't show as much about like why you're wanting to do this if you just kind of follow that route. If you did something different and then you ended up in law school, you probably thought very clearly about why you wanted to be there. So I would say just know what your story is, what you want to convey that's true about yourself, and they can decide whether or not you're a fit for their organization, their firm. But I still think that it has to be true at its center.
The reality is, most of these things we're talking about, you can't actually change. So it's like your background is what it is. Your grades
Unless
are
you're
what they
lying.
are. Your skin color is what it is. Your gender, whatever, is what it is. So if you're a woman going in a firm where you're like, oh, they're 80% men. First off, do you think you might actually want to work there? Maybe not. They know who you are. You're in the interview. So yeah, I just think anytime people can lead with authenticity and feeling comfortable in themselves and knowing themselves, I think this is where I put a plug for therapy. The more that you know and understand yourself and your background and what works for you and what doesn't work for you, I think the more you're going to come off as an authentic, easy person to get along with, because nobody is for everyone. No organization is for everyone. And it's all about finding that fit. So if you are feeling like, wow, there's like a lot of tension in all of these interviews and I feel like I don't belong here, well, you probably don't. That's just the harsh reality of that organization may not be the right place for you.
I think people struggle with that the most when it's a place they thought they really wanted, or
Yeah.
everyone's been talking about how great it is. I think that is the situation that people struggle with because they ask themselves, why didn't it seem like a fit for me when it's supposed to be the best? I really think it's important to say what will work for me and not what I've heard other people say or what I've read.
I think that's so true. And I definitely had that situation when I was a summer. And even looking back, it was actually clear in some of the questions I was getting in the interview process that this was probably not going to be a great fit. Mostly because I was interested in litigation. This was a firm that was more known for their corporate side, but they did litigation. But I had conversations in these interviews with people about that. And they're like, oh, we're equally good at both and blah, blah, blah. And I went there and that wasn't true and it didn't work out. And looking back, I probably should have clued in more to, I don't know that this is really the right fit, but it's hard at the time because you're like, oh, this is going to be so cool. And I'm going to get to do this cool thing and everything's going to be great. But like, it was not the right fit for me.
See, I think that's interesting. That's like the opposite of what we're talking about, where the employer is trying to be something that they're not. And I
Right.
think that happens all the time also.
Absolutely.
And that's something to be on the lookout for. So that's something to think about also when you're interviewing. Does it seem like they're being genuine? Because I think you can really get a sense for it. And I know as a recruiter, there are people who are just very rah-rah cheerleaders. I try to be as honest as I can in terms of this is what it's like here, because you want people to want to work there and to fit in and to think that it's a good place. So I feel like saying that some practice area that they are very unlikely to get was going to be possible is never going to work out.
Yeah, I just learned from that. And my first summer had worked at a place that was like super litigation focused. And just in terms of what books were in the library and really basic things like that was a totally different vibe. But yeah, just understanding that people will say all kinins of things. Because that's the point here is they feel the same way. They're like, oh, we're not really what they're looking for, but maybe I can slant it so that this person feels like what we're like. Like, I want them to
Like,
like us, it's going on both sides.
It's like places that really, really market themselves as a quote unquote lifestyle firm,
Haha.
right? Like that's a red flag.
Sorry.
No, not like that. But you can ask solid questions. Oh, what is your billable hours requirement? And then you get an idea of how hard people are working. What's the average? That kind of thing. So there are questions you can ask that aren't just what their marketing stuff says.
Although I will say I would probably wait until I had the offer to ask
Oh, yeah,
ask
yeah.
that. So
I
don't
didn't
ask
mean
that.
in it.
After the interview, you can ask all these questions.
Or
after
pro
you have the
bono
offer.
hours
Right.
or more details on that. But yeah, those are questions to definitely ask after. But you can figure out from some of that whether it's going to be a fit with what you're looking for, your values.
Yeah, some of this you can definitely get objective data on. What are the practice areas they practice? How many billable hours do they require? What are their survey grades that their people gave them? There's actually a lot of information out there. All right, before we wrap up, there is one thing. So if you have a lot of interests or skills, or maybe you have a weird academic or job background, is it okay to emphasize the more relevant ones? Or are you guys saying that I need to talk about every single thing on my resume to be authentic?
Well, there definitely won't be time to talk about every single thing. So I think you have to figure out what you think are the most important and relevant. I do think it has to be somewhat relevant to skills that maybe you would have as a lawyer. But I think that there are things that might not, off the top of your head, seem relevant. Let's say that you've been really into this acting class or something. And it's like, oh, I've developed skills in public speaking and other things that could be really relevant to being a lawyer. And so it may not seem like it's on point, but actually is on point. So I always think it's nice to talk about some outside interests where you can bring in skills that make sense for, doing well in this profession.
That's funny. That was the exact same example I was going to give.
Sorry.
It's just funny. We're all thinking on the same lines here. I really do think people should have something interesting on their interest line. Like, I had a friend in law school who put cheese, and everyone's like, cheese? She's like, literally every single interview, I spend at least 20 minutes talking about cheese. Would you rather be talking about cheese or your favorite law school class? And we're like, yeah, fair point.
Yeah. And I always tell people be as specific as possible, but maybe she actually wanted that to be general on purpose, to be like, I like all cheese of any sort.
No, she does cheese classes. She could talk about cheese for hours.
And that's obviously the thing. You can tell from an interest section which is the thing that most people are going to pick out of it. That's like the weirder thing.
Yeah.
Or something like that. I think that is what makes you a human in this interview, is your interests and your personality.
Well, and the specifics. So if somebody has reading as one of their interests, that's not very interesting. If they tell me reading historical fiction, now, even if I have no interest in historical fiction, I can talk to them about their interest in historical fiction. And that is going to let us kill several minutes of that interview with something that is more interesting than talking about your favorite law school class.
Absolutely. So that is why everyone needs to have an interest section on their resume also.
Right. And to have them specific enough that you can actually start a conversation about them. Oh, that's interesting. Historical fiction. What have you been reading lately?
You don't want to have travel. I find that particularly boring. You pick a area of the world you've most traveled or have been to 100 countries. You need something that they can dive into.
Right. Like, oh, I see that you've been to India. That sounds interesting. Tell me more about that. Not, oh, I see you like to travel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
where do you
reading,
like to go?
Cooking, travel. Yeah.
Yeah. Or
boring.
like the person who put cooking. And I was like, what are you into baking? And he's like, what? I'm like, you put it on your resume. He's like, well, it would be more accurate to say I watch baking shows. I'm like, then you should put that on there because this has now gone downhill fast.
Well, also, that's another example of, I think sometimes people put things on their interest section, again, trying to have a certain image or convey a certain person that you're not. And that will bite you somewhere in the interview when they ask you about it.
Yeah, it's like, just be yourself. Like, you certainly have some interests outside of law, I hope.
And it
Put them
doesn't have
down
to be
there.
a hobby. I think that's the other thing. A lot of people are like, I don't have a hobby. But then when you talk to them about what they do in their free time, it's like, you do have things that you do in your free time. They're just not like pottery or tennis or something. It's something a little bit different.
Yeah. All right. So basically, be yourself on your resume, put something interesting on there to talk about, and then go into the interview and just be that person. All right. That was my final thought. Any final thoughts you want to share here?
I would say that you want to be as genuine as you can at the center. But my caveat to all of this is you're not just talking to your friend. So you have to have some kind of filter on this, be genuine. For example, they ask you about a time you failed and what happened. It's how you're phrasing it, right? You're not picking something that really makes you look terrible.
Right.
And when you're showing how you turned it around in the end. So this is how you're selling yourself. So you have to have some kind of filter on it. But at the center, it should be who you really are and what you're really interested in.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah, you probably don't want to be talking about the time you got thrown in jail because of whatever. It's like, okay, maybe that's really key to the story and you need to talk about it. But if you don't need to talk about it, maybe leave that one out.
Exactly. And this is where I would test some of these stories on other people.
Right. Yeah, because you're going to get the, I don't think that's something you probably want to bring up if you can avoid it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, my pleasure. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, check out careerdicta.com or you can visit lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for watching, and please give us a like and subscribe. See you soon.